Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Deborah Bourbon wash processed Panama from H&S Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And H&S, based out of Laramie, Wyoming. And this coffee is our July 2024 Coffee of the Month, as it was voted on by you guys as the coffee you most wanted to see us review. And I was actually very excited to see this coffee win that poll for a couple of reasons. The first of which being that I very much enjoy reviewing washed non-geisha Panamanian coffees. And the second reason being that we've had some pretty positive experiences with H&S this year, especially when it comes to their ultralight offerings. So there's a very strong chance that I would have purchased this coffee had it not won that Coffee of the Month poll. But I'm definitely happy that it did, because it does give us an opportunity to discuss this one. So we will see how it's turned out, as this right here is day 56. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a slightly higher extraction one at a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which typically indicates a medium fine grind. However, we did go a little bit more fine on that grind as well. Now, roast profile for this coffee. This one, once again, is listed as one of H&S's ultralight offerings, which do tend to be some very, very light profiled coffees, as this one still continues to skew on one of the lightest roasted coffees, especially pertaining to American coffee roasters that we've reviewed on this channel. So that's basically to say that as far as American coffee roasters go, and even in comparison with a lot of the other lighter profiled coffee roasters, this one's pretty close to being one of the lightest roasted coffees that we've reviewed. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 31, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the cup had a fair bit of softness to it, but a very lovely lingering fruit profile in the background. It's very tropical forward, also in a subtle sense, but there's a strong abundance of tropical berry as well. Has a strong floral aspect to it that's reminiscent slightly of the La Papaya Geisha, but for the most part, it was very lovely all around. This coffee, for the most part, was a little bit more soft, and that's kind of what I was expecting for this first impression, given that's usually the first impression we've had of H&S's ultralight offerings, so very much in line with the expectations. But since the base was so clean, a lot of these fruit profiles and these floral profiles were felt in a little bit more pronounced of a sense, just because of how subtle and delicate that base was to begin with. Day 34 through the Chemex, and it's every bit as good this time around, as there's a little bit more of a focus on the tropical aspects with an abundance of the tropical berries. In addition to that, there's an above average clarity and sweetness with a stronger fruit profile, but also a lingering floral feel to the cup as well. Very pretty, yet again, so a lot of positives to take away from these first couple of impressions. Day 37 through the April brewer, and there's been some consistency to this coffee, as it is offering a notably lighter profile with an abundance of tropical fruit characteristics in a sweeter citric sense and an additional tropical berry. So once again, notes have been pretty consistent up to this point. It's been pretty in line with those previous days, and there hasn't been too much to discuss, as these first couple of days were kind of a feel out period to see where this coffee might go. And obviously on day 40, we decided to push it to kind of be a little bit more in line with H&S's recipe for this coffee. And it definitely seems to help, as it was the best it had been up to this point, offering notably more intensity with a slightly geisha-like tone, as there was a wonderful florality as well as tropicality to the cup, yet again in that very sense. Cup is very deep with a combination of rose, citrus, bright tropical, so a bunch of different things were present within this coffee, and that definitely seemed to help with the overall experience. Day 43 through the Chemex with the higher extraction adjustments, and it continues to improve, so I felt like it wasn't necessarily at its peak as of this moment, and there was definitely still a lot more to be had from this coffee. Most intensity up to this point in the tropical sense, as it's also reminiscent of what I would describe as being mixed berry cereal, which is a very nice thing that kind of gave it a little bit more of that geisha-like feel. Has plenty of depth in the finish as well, with an almost sugary floral feel, plenty within the cup yet again. Day 46 through the V60 with the same adjustments, and it's been very similar to that day 40 mark, still offering the brighter tropics with an additional berry tone to it, nice intensity, and just more consistency in general. And here on day 49, we opted to go through the Chemex with the same higher extraction adjustments. Actually, we pushed it even further, and there was a little bit of a mixed feel on this day, as it did have a very nice, we'll say, floral forward feel to it. And the first time I've experienced what I would describe as being the starfruit note that they have listed on here, I felt maybe a little bit more of a generic tropicality to it. This time I said, I can see a starfruit. It makes a lot of sense why this note is listed on here, as it just has slightly better definition. Notes feeling a little bit more defined with a prominent florality. So I think for a number of reasons it helped, but I was kind of enjoying a little bit more of the fruit profile as opposed to the more floral tones in this one. And that's why on day 52, we opted to go back to the V60. And it's a very interesting coffee as I've kind of sat back and reflected on it, because it acts as two different coffees. It definitely has plenty of Bourbon characteristics, but it also at times feels like a Gesha. Each sip actually offers you something different. And while the entire profile of this coffee has been pretty consistent, it just seems that you can have one sip that tastes like one thing, the next sip that tastes like one thing, and then it can go back to tasting like that first thing that you've had. So it's just kind of an interesting coffee in that way, as that's kind of what I've been alluding to with the depth of this one. It does offer notable brightness while there's still more of that fruit sweet feel to it. Base and tone continue to skew in the softer tropical citrus with a lingering florality that often continues to remain present as well. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go ahead and start with the cleanliness level 4. So this one is extremely clean, and I remember thinking to myself when making this tasting wheel, can I really justify level 5? And I thought really long and hard about it, and I said, I'm making this tasting wheel alongside of the other Panamanian coffee that H&S released. That was the Iridescence, of course. And given that I made these tasting wheels literally just a couple minutes apart from each other, I said it's not as clean as that coffee. So even though this one is extraordinarily clean, it does not necessarily reach that same level of cleanliness. So level 4 is where I settled, though I do have to be honest and say it's higher than that level 4. It's pretty close to achieving that level 5, so higher side of that level 4. Finish, level 4. And as I've kind of mentioned, the finish is different. So I want to kind of give one description to that finish, but at times it can feel a little bit more sugary floral. At times it can feel a little bit more tropical floral. It can feel a little bit more citrus. I should say tropical sweet, but it can feel a little bit more citrus. It can have that slightly mixed berry cereal aspect to it. So it just kind of depends. The finish isn't necessarily indicative of the overall experience of the coffee, mostly because it's one of those ever-changing qualities to it. Sweetness, level 4. And this is another one where I thought to myself, this is actually pretty sweet. I am enjoying the sweetness, but once again, I think it's because the entire base was so clean, subtle, and tame that a lot of the experiences you have in this coffee can feel a little bit more intensified because of that, and the sweetness was one of those. So having that there at that level 4 is once again not necessarily an indicative representative of how intense this coffee was in terms of the sweetness, but it was pretty close to also scoring higher in that regard as well. Florality, level 4. And I kept going back to the rose. I can't recall whether or not they have any floral note listed on here, but I kept feeling a fair bit of that more herbal sense to it, a little bit more of that red floral tone to it, and that's why I continued to kind of itemize or see that rose-like feel to this coffee. So definitely one of the more prominent notes within this one. Berry fruit, level 4, and I think they have something along the lines of a kiwi listed on here. That makes so much sense because this one definitely had a little bit more of a tropical berry-like feel to it. Once again, since this coffee is so clean to begin with, all of these things were presented in a much more subtle and delicate sense, but at the same time prominent because of just how clean that base was. Citrus fruit, level 4. I highlighted and focused most specifically on that starfruit-like note, though I think that might go in the berry category. But given that there was a little bit more of a tropical citrus feel to this coffee in general, citrus was always going to be justified at that level 4 mark. And then one level 3, the acidity level 3. This is another one that kind of waffled between the 3 and the 4. And as I was making this tasting wheel alongside the Iridescence as well, I kept thinking to myself, okay, it's not quite as bright. It's not quite as clean, and it's not quite as bright. And that's the reason I have to leave it there at that level 3 mark, mostly because just kind of comparing these coffees alongside themselves, that's the final consensus I had towards this one. And then I think the last thing worth discussing is the body at a level 2. Slightly lighter bodied cup of coffee, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of that one. I think I probably expected going into it to have a little bit more medium bodied texture to it, but it did turn out a slight bit lighter than that. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I'll start with this. I think this might be, as of this moment, my favorite coffee of the month coffee that we've reviewed this year. And it's easily one of my favorite coffee of the month coffees that we've ever reviewed, which is pretty high praise already to begin with when it comes to this coffee. But I feel like, if I'm being completely honest, it was probably overshadowed by the Iridescence, which is a coffee that I enjoyed significantly more than this one. And obviously we have that review coming out here in the near future as well, so definitely keep an eye out for that one. But that's to say, I feel like if I would have had this coffee on its own without the Iridescence, then I might have been even more impressed by the way that it turned out. That's not to say that I wasn't impressed by this coffee. I think it's wonderful, especially at the price point, especially for what this coffee is. But that's in line with a lot of my expectations for not just H&S, but for what this coffee is. This is a washed, non-Panamanian geisha, and I continuously say that these are coffees that I just very much enjoy to start with, and I very much enjoy reviewing as well. So for all of those reasons, it reached the expectations that I had, and it exceeded those expectations so slightly. Once again, just happened to be slightly overshadowed by a coffee that I was even more impressed with. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. As mentioned, it has a nice combination of a geisha-like feel and a Bourbon-like feel, all in this lighter profile. So that's the first place I want to start. It's a very clean coffee, so it is a little bit more tame than maybe some people might like, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to the profile of this one being on that notably lighter side of things. But outside of that, it does have a wonderful abundance of floral and fruit quality, so it's reaching the levels, I would want to say maybe the bare minimum of the levels that I'm looking for in a coffee like this. Level 4, higher level 4 for cleanliness, higher level 4 for sweetness, higher level 4 for florality, and a fair bit of fruit profiles also scoring at that level 4. So if you enjoy those 4 things in a softer pace, and this one has a lot of those in abundance, that's the best direction I can point somebody towards for this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Deborah Bourbon Wash Process Panama from H&S Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.